Hello everyone, today's video is going to be about the basics of RAM. We will also cover symptoms of failure, reasons for failure, how to test and replace your RAM sticks. I will also add a clip of adding RAM into my Linux computer that I have already shared a video of the build. That link to that video is actually down below. So let's get after it. What is RAM? It is random access memory. It's basically the middleman between your processor and your hard drive. Why is it so important? Well, it's a super fast form of computer memory that allows your computer to store what it needs at that exact point and nothing extra. Your hard drive stores everything and your RAM only stores what is needed for the processor to process at that point in time. So when you open an application, such as say a Word document, the RAM will load everything it needs from the hard drive, so it'll pull from the hard drive to the RAM, and then the processor pulls from the RAM really quick, like faster than I can actually snap my fingers. Without it, basically your computer, your phone, your tablet, whatever your device is, would run extremely slow. So like RAM versus hard drive, these are short-term memory, whereas your hard drive is long-term memory. And then RAM also needs power in order to run. So the moment you turn off your computer or it loses power, this RAM and your processor both actually get completely wiped of any data that was on them. So some types of RAM would be SRAM, which is static RAM. There's dynamic RAM, which is DRAM, that came after SRAM. There's SDRAM, which is synchronous dynamic RAM, which is today's technology. There's also VRAM, which is video RAM that is used in graphics cards. Now, I'm not going to dive too far into these because there's a lot of differences and there's a lot of things that we could go over, but it would literally turn this video into 2-3 hours long to cover every bit of what we could with RAM. So what are some symptoms of it failing? On a Windows computer, it'll actually tell you that, to check your computer for memory problems. Some other symptoms would be your computer may randomly shut down and reboot on its own. Your computer could start freezing and overall performance just gets really slow. If you check your event log on your Windows computer, it'll actually tell you that there's an error if you dig down for it and start checking all your events. Blue screen of death could pop up. Some of your files, when you go to save them, they might actually become corrupted, so you can't actually reopen them after you save them. Also, there's times that your computer's motherboard might actually beep at you from the computer tower. There's a sequence of beeps, and I can't remember how many it is, but it'll actually let you know that your RAM is going bad or already is bad. So what actually causes RAM to fail? Power surges could do it. Not grounding yourself prior to working on your computer. So if you open it up to replace a hard drive, add a graphics card, replace a network card, whatever it may be, if you open it up and you don't ground yourself, you could actually cause damage to the RAM or the motherboard or even the processor. Excessive heat from your computer or anything else that might be stored around your computer. If you have your computer in an area where it can't breathe, that could cause problems. If you incorrectly overclock your machine, such as overclocking your processor, say you've got it overclocked so that way you get a better performance, that could cause issues. Also, just generally bad RAM sticks. Just like anything else, there's always that one bad apple out of the bunch. How can you fix it and test it? Well, you can test each RAM stick by pulling all your RAM sticks out and then testing all of them in one RAM slot. If you've only got one RAM stick but multiple slots, then you would just test that and see if the performance keeps happening. Because they could be just you have one bad RAM stick, or you could potentially have a bad RAM slot on your motherboard. If that's the case, and say you're using all the RAM slots and you need all those RAM slots, then you might have to replace your motherboard. If you're only using, say, 2 out of your 4 RAM slots, well then, if one goes bad, you may not need to replace your motherboard because you can just move that stick elsewhere. On a Windows computer, when you reboot your computer, you can hold the Windows key and the R key on startup, and then you can run your check disk, which is CHKDSK. And you'll follow the prompts, it'll run a scan on your computer and it'll tell you, if there's any issues going on there. On a Mac, what you would do is in the top left corner, you would actually click on the Apple logo, click on About This Mac, it'll take you into the overview, and then you'll click on System Report. That'll take you, starting off in the hardware section, you just go down to memory, and in that chart, you just check on status, and it'll actually tell you what the status of your RAM stick is for each individual RAM stick that you have. So how do you replace it? This can actually be tricky depending on the computer that you're working with. If you're working on a laptop, then you have to pull off the bottom of the case, and then what I would suggest is pull your battery out, and then you can go ahead and replace the RAM sticks that are in those slots. On a Mac, such as the computer I'm using right now, sometimes those RAM sticks are actually soldered in there, so you can't replace them. What you have to do is buy a new Mac or replace the whole motherboard. Kind of a pain, right? On iMacs, it's actually a lot easier. On the bottom of an iMac, there's a couple of screws. Drop down, and then there's a tab that you pull. And when you pull that tab, you can pull out the RAM sticks, and then you just kind of put everything back together when you're done replacing them. On towers, which you're going to see later on in this video on my Linux computer, you can actually see, when you open up the case, you can see the RAM. Before opening that case, please disconnect from power, plug your power cord, and then move your tower to where you have good lighting. It's not too terribly bad on that. As far as phones and tablets, might as well just go ahead and replace them, to be honest. So here in this clip, what you will see is me adding more RAM to my computer. I originally had 8 gigs of PC3 RAM in this tower. I pulled out one stick to actually show you what I've got here. It's a 4 gig stick, nothing special. What I'm going to do is put this one back in and add an additional 8 gigs of RAM to make that computer have 16 gigs of RAM. It's always important to keep your RAM sticks at the same memory, so if you have a 4 gig stick, all others should be 4 gig sticks. If you have an 8 gig, keep with 8 gig, and so on and so forth. That helps ensure that the computer is going to function properly, because sometimes some computers actually will not run if you don't have the sticks matching. Some will run, but you'll come across a bunch of weird issues, and it's like, well, why is this happening? I can't explain it. Well, you got your RAM sticks messed up. It's also suggested to keep them at the same clock speed. Chances are you won't have too many issues if you don't, but it's always suggested. Best case scenario, keep them with the same exact brand. So try to match them as close as possible. Basically everything that I've just showed you is what I'm going to be doing with this tower here. All of my RAM sticks are the same brand, same speed, and same amount of gigs. So I've got my RAM stick here that I need to put back in that I already had. As you can tell, there's still one here. I didn't take this one out because my processor fan is covering it partially, so I basically have to remove this fan before pulling this RAM stick out. So on some slots, you'll notice that they're stationary, while others actually, like this one up here, they kind of move and then clip into place. You can actually hear them snap. Well, sometimes they have them to where they snap on both sides of where the RAM goes. But in this case, this motherboard has them locked into place here, and it just snaps up top. So we're going to go ahead and place this in. You want to make sure that this little notch right here lines up appropriately here. Now, if you only have 2 RAM sticks, which I actually have a total of 4, so I'm going to use the spot that's already being used and these 3 next to it. But if you are only using 2, you'll notice that this one is a different color. First and third match, second and fourth match. So if you only have 2 sticks, you want to make sure you put them in the matching slots. So we're going to go ahead and put this first one in. And we're going to push down. Hear that snap in there. And make sure that both sides are secure. And that's all there is to it. As far as RAM in your computer, what do I suggest? I actually get this question quite often. I get a lot of people going, hey, what brand, what hard drive, processor, RAM, so on and so forth, what should I get? Well, as far as RAM, I never suggest anything under 8 gigs. Even if you're like, oh, all I'm doing is surfing the web and I might save some photos to my computer. That's great and all, but what if one day it's like, oh, hey, I should probably go and do blah, blah, blah. And it's like, oh, well, my computer can't handle it. Because 4 gigs of RAM, believe it or not, in today's day and age, it's not that much. So I always suggest 8 gigs. If you're doing a lot of coding or CAD drawings, I typically recommend minimum 16 gigs of RAM. But typically if you're doing marketing and CAD and anything of that nature, you should theoretically have a graphics card in your computer. You could throw 32 gigs of RAM in there. That's great. That's going to help a little bit, but you're still going to bog down your processor. So having a graphics card with that VRAM will help out a lot as well. Depending on what your purpose is, depends on what I'm actually going to suggest for you as far as RAM. But those are some basic guidelines to go with. Never go with anything under 8 gigs. If you've got some heavy duty work that you're going to do, 16 or more, consider a graphics card if possible. But I do want you to know that the performance of your machine is not just based off of RAM. You still need to consider your processor. You know, if you get 32 gigs of RAM, but you have an Intel i3 core processor and you plan on doing, CAD drawings, well, your processor is not going to be able to handle that. So you want to consider your processor. Also your hard drive. If you have an extremely slow hard drive, that's not going to do you any good. If you have a 5-year-old spinning hard drive and you're trying to do heavy-duty graphics like marketing, that's not going to do you any good if you're trying to save to your hard drive. Solid-state drives are a lot better for that. So you just need to consider other parts of your machine besides RAM. And I'm hoping to be able to cover a lot of that information in future videos. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, leave them down below. I'm more than happy to answer them. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos. Thank you.